Good evening. Kaya, Wanneroo, councillors, staff, ladies and gentlemen. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we meet on, the Whadjuk people. We would like to pay respect to the elders of the Noongar Nation, past, present and emerging, who have walked and cared for the land, and we acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contributions made to the life of this city and this region. I declare the council members' briefing session open at 6 p.m. Just a notification, please note that the audio proceedings of tonight's meeting will be live broadcast online with the exception of matters discussed behind closed doors. That broadcast will remain available following the conclusion of the meeting. Item 1, attendances. As per the record, councillors, just to note that we have Mr Steve Marmion along this evening, who is Acting Director, Community Development through till the 28th of June. So councillors, just recognising that, please go gently on him. We'll see how we go. Item 2, apologies and leave of absence. I have apologies from Mayor Roberts, Councillor Baker, Councillor Berry, Councillor Wright and Councillor Parker. We then move on through to item 3, which is deputations. The rules of deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, depending upon the number of deputations received. I believe we only have one this evening, to address council members, unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement with no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from elected members relating to the subject matter should be reserved until the administration has presented the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted, and there is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. And this evening we have one deputation on item 4.13, which is the transition of the Yanchep Two Rocks community bus service. And our speaker this evening, or presenter, is Julio Tremba. Julie, if you could please join us, and whilst many of us know you, Julie, if you could just state your full name and address for the records, that would be very much appreciated.
Good evening. Thank you, Deputy Mayor and councillors and staff of City of Wanneroo. My name is Julio Tremba. I reside at 29 St Andrews Drive in Yanchep and have lived there for 35 years. I just wanted to give a brief history of the Yanchep and Two Rocks community bus. The start of the Yanchep Two Rocks community bus was on the 13th of October 1989. Before this date, there was no bus service to Yanchep and Two Rocks. Prior to 1983, the only service in our area was the MTT bus, and this only went to the National Park at 7 a.m. and took people to Wanneroo and then back again at the National Park at 5 p.m, Monday to Friday. Yanchep Sun City Proprietary Limited at the time was providing a bus service to take the residents to the National Park, and I also believe that the City of Wanneroo had to subsidise $2 per passenger for the MTT bus. In 1984, Phil Rankin tried to get a bus service started with the assistance of Yanchep Sun City Proprietary Limited. Phil Rankin started the Volunteers Association and to take residents to the shops, and was able to use the bus from the Yanchep Sun City. This was serviced and maintained, but over time the bus broke down and was not due to be fixed. For 6 months, a convoy of 3 private cars took people to the shops and doctors. A bus was purchased from the school contractor. However, this bus took more money to maintain. As there was no alternative, the service was to be discontinued until Phil read that the West Australian Family Association was seeking interest for a community bus trial that were not adequately serviced. At that time, there wasn't very many people living in Yanchep and Two Rocks, but it was still a service that was required. Phil Rankin asked Council to support his application for a community bus under the umbrella of Council. The Volunteers Drivers Association was disbanded and a public meeting was held on the 30th of August 1989 at the now called Phil Rankin Centre. The purpose of the meeting was to form the Yanchep Two Rocks Community Bus Management Committee. The objectives of the committee was to provide a free community bus service to those residents of Yanchep and Two Rocks who, because of age, frailty, ill health, disability, or just no transport to access health, welfare and recreational facilities. So on the 13th of October 1989, our first ever community bus was on the road. We have held fundraising activities to keep the bus on the road and maintained logbooks and records. This is a unique service that is totally run and manned by volunteers. With the help of City of Wanneroo, through MOU, they have helped with servicing and making sure the bus is in top order. The community bus runs regularly on Monday and Friday to service doctors' appointments and to the shops. Every Thursday, travels a little bit further, goes to Ocean Keys, Wanneroo and Joondalup shops. The community bus is a door-to-door service. This is the only outing some of the residents get. And it's also a way to keep them belonging to the community. I've been part of the community bus since its inception in 1989. My husband drove the bus for 21 years. I still see a need to continue this service into the future and hope that you'll all agree with this. Some historical facts. One of the things that we had to do when the first bus was delivered, we had to keep running facts of how many passengers, how many kilometres, to make sure that it was viable. So the historical facts from this October 1989 to March 2022, total kilometres travelled was 747,287. Total passengers carried during that time was 167,451. Since 1989, there have been 5 community buses. As per MOU, we have limited time to hold the bus, only 5 to 6 years, to make sure that it's still in good working order. We have a couple of passengers that have been on the bus since day one, and they say they can't do without it. It is not only a bus ride to the shops or doctors, but a lifeline. A lot of these people don't get out, and this is what keeps them in the community. So it's a lifeline, it's a way to pass time with friends that they make on the bus. They share a cuppa with at the shops. It assists not in the physical well-being, but the mental health as well. Our drivers, who have usually retired, it keeps them active in the community as well. And the drivers love doing it, and the passengers love the drivers. Thank you for taking the time to listen and for the support and continued support from the City of Wanneroo. It does mean a great deal. As I said, I've been with it since its inception, so it's close to my heart. The Yanchep Two Rocks Community Bus has formed a subcommittee under the Yanchep Two Rocks Recreation Association, which has been actively involved in the community of Yanchep and Two Rocks in 1977. So I think the partnership between the two of them will go a long way to creating something even better and stronger for the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. It's I can hear the emotion in your voice, and it clearly very heartfelt. You have read the recommendation from administration in the report, and your view on the recommendation. Are you supportive or?
Yes, definitely. It's a collaboration. We've had many meetings, and we've looked at the best avenue of what to do with the community bus and how to make it go forward and be viable and to benefit the communities of Yanchep and Two Rocks. So yes.
Excellent, thank you. Councillors, any questions of clarification? It was just a clarification question. No worries. Councillor Sangali.
The only question I would have is, would Mrs O'Trimber be opposed to us actually submitting your deputation to the community history? Because I believe that's quite a great sum up of the history of activities in the city of Wanneroo.
That'd be nice, because I always feel that it is part of, especially the Yanchep Two Rocks history, but it goes further than that because it is part of the Wanneroo history as well. So, yes, I have no worries with that. Thank you.
Further questions? Yep. Councillor Sinnett, Kitty.
Julie, I don't have a question. I just want to say to you from, I think, everybody here, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for everything that you've done for this bus, for the community and everything. You are such a big asset to us all. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions of clarification, councillors? There's none. I therefore close deputations. Thank you, Julie. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
With that, councillors, we move on to item 4, reports. And councillors, and we're going on to planning and sustainability. Councillors' declarations of interest, including the nature and extent. Councillors, if you have any declarations on any of these reports that we're talking about tonight, if you just indicate at that time, please. Councillors, just with your indulgence, suggestion from the CEO, and I think it's probably worthwhile, is moving, given the deputation, actually just asking Mr Marmion to move to item 4.13 if he wants to present that item. Just whilst, actually, sorry, you can do it from there if you like, Steve, rather than playing musical chairs. Or I do like the exercise though. Mr Marmion, if you wanted to do it from your seat, that would be fine. Councillors, are we happy with that approach? Okay, thank you. Mr Marmion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I actually hadn't proposed to introduce this item because I think has been to a forum, and I think council members are quite aware of the report. But I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillors, do we have any questions on this item at all? Usually take that as a very positive sign that there's general support for the item, councillors, and hoping that's the case next week. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr Marmion. You don't have to hang around now, Julie, if you don't wish to. Thank you. Right, we then go back to planning and sustainability. And welcome, Mr Dixon.
Good evening, Deputy Mayor and Council members. There are 6 items from the Planning and Sustainability Directorate on tonight's agenda. Mr Van Heinigen would like to briefly introduce item 4.2, and we will be happy to answer questions on the other items. Deputy Mayor, before Emile introduces item 4.2, could I briefly point out one change to item 4.4, the East Wanneroo Community Reference Group? The terms of reference included as attachment 1 on page 118 of the agenda refers to a minimum of 3 meetings a year. This should be a maximum of 4 meetings a year, and administration will make that change before next week's council meeting.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Mr Van Heinigen.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. So in February 2020, the WAPC approved an amendment to the Metropolitan Region Scheme to lift the urban deferment on the land and to rezone the land to urban in the MRS. So the city is required in terms of the planning legislation to amend its district structure plan number 2 to align the scheme with the MRS. So in June 2020, Council initiated this amendment to rezone the land from rural resource zone to urban development. A key consideration for council was the need for the payment of developer contributions by the proponent. This is facilitated through the urban development zoning, which requires the preparation of a local structure plan. The amendment includes provisions to be included in the scheme to ensure that the local structure plan will require developer contributions. As part of the amendment process, the Environmental Protection Authority also required the protection of vegetation on the land. The amendment was advertised for 42 days and 5 submissions have been received. The key issue raised by the proponent during the advertising is around the most appropriate planning mechanism to deal with the developer contributions as well as with the environmental issues. The proponent's view is that a local development plan is the best mechanism to deal with the environmental issues, and the contributions can be dealt with through the subdivision and development process. So administration recommends that as the rezoning is to urban development, which requires a structure plan, that a local structure plan should be required to deal with both the environmental considerations and the developer contributions. We also recommend that in order to simplify the planning process, that an LDP is no longer be required. This is because the rezoning is only for 4 lots. Usually we don't require a local structure plan for such a small area. But a structure plan is a much stronger planning instrument because it gets approved by the WAPC, and that's why we're recommending that the structure plan be used as the mechanism. I just want to mention also that we will be updating the details, the map in attachment 2. We'll update that to more clearly show the boundaries of the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan and also the East Wanneroo Cell 3 Structure Plan. I also just want to mention that this amendment is not to actually go into the details of the contributions required. That can be dealt with when council considers the local structure plan that will come back to council after it's been prepared. So this is just to put the planning framework in place to facilitate that. I'm happy to take questions.
I have Councillor Raitkin first.
Thank you. I just want to clarify, is this the site where they wanted to put an aged care and nursing home site?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's right, a nursing home and a retirement village. So dealing with over 55s living, but also the people that require higher care.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. Page 44 of the agenda proper refers to the fact that negotiations over the voluntary developer contributions failed in 2020, and that was largely due to the possibility that the state government may require the development to retain a high proportion of the vegetation, making it commercially unviable. I just wanted to know, has either the developer or the city conferred with the state government since that time to clarify the requirement? And if so, do we know what proportion of the vegetation would have to be required?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So yes, the proponent has discussed the environmental requirements with the EPA, with also DBCA, and they agreed that it just needs to be dealt with through subsequent planning stages. The EPA wasn't, they didn't say specifically how much vegetation needs to be protected, but they considered that the preparation of a structure plan on LDP will be able to provide flexibility later in the process. So that is a responsibility of the proponent to liaise with the state government to make sure that they comply with all the environmental regulations.
Now, Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. On that particular point, I mean, the vegetation is quite extensive on, I guess, the 2 southern blocks. To be able to come to a compromise on that may be difficult. Do you see that as being a major problem? I know it's sort of been brought up in your discussion, but I look at it in terms that it might have a fairly severe impact based on what may be the end result. Could you expand on that, please?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, so that is one of the reasons why the discussions are essentially ongoing with the state government so that they can get an agreement on how much need to be retained. As you say, most of the vegetation is on Lot 28 Belgrade Road, so it is concentrated mostly on that one lot. The environmental considerations was the main reason why this was delayed, because to enable those further discussions to take place. But those discussions will continue to take place, and then whatever the agreement is between the state government and the proponent, that will be reflected in the local structure plan.
The clarification on developer contributions on that, because I know that there's been a bit of conjecture between the applicant and the city, et cetera, will that be determined by the West Australian Planning Commission, and if they come to an arrangement, we may lose out on that, or depending, we may get the full contribution? I don't know where we are on that. Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so we will be requiring the contributions. That's one of the reasons why we needed a structure plan to be put in place, so that we can include the provisions, development contributions within that document. So we have discussed with the proponent what our requirements would be. So we would be requiring the land for the POS to be, public open space to be provided, which is a normal condition. Also for the development of the public open space, and then also to provide the land and contributions towards the widening of Dundebar Road. And then we've also advised the applicant that for them to do a needs analysis to determine whether they need contributions for community facilities. Because previously it was part of the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan area. It's no longer part of that. So that previously the district structure plan required a local structure plan to be prepared over the whole precinct and a DCP. That's fallen away, so that's why the structure plan is the best mechanism to still require that and give us the head of power.
Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. The question goes to, I guess, whether a local structure plan or development plan be put in place. The proponent in your report is stating that because of the changes the state government made to state planning 3.6, they're suggesting, as it says in the report, to go straight to a development infrastructure process, subdivision, rather than the longer time frame of doing a local structure plan. What's the timelines of either or, and why is administration wanting to go specifically for the structure plan?
To you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so because we couldn't reach a voluntary agreement, that means that if we had a voluntary agreement, there wouldn't be a requirement to actually have provisions in a structure plan, because up to now we couldn't reach an agreement. We require a local structure plan. So in terms of what we've advised the applicant is that we just need a simplified structure plan, because it's only over 4 lots. It's just a simple structure plan which probably involved the same amount of work than an LDP, so it's not more work that needs to be done through the structure plan. And the time frame from that, because it's simple, wouldn't be a long process to prepare that. In terms of the provisions of the yeah, I don't know if that answers all of your questions. If you could repeat some of it, if I haven't answered.
Sort of not. So they're suggesting that State Planning Policy 3.6, which came into effect after this process, because this has been ongoing now for almost 4 years, I think, which is an awfully long time. So what they're suggesting, that a development infrastructure may be imposed through that process as opposed to doing a local structure plan.
Yeah, so the first point is, because it's urban rezoning to urban development, the urban development zone requires a structure plan to be prepared. In terms of a structure plan gets approved by the WAPC, as I mentioned, so that's a strong mechanism to include contributions in the absence of a DCP, because we're not requiring a DCP. And then in terms of just deferring it to the subdivision and development process increases the risk for the city that it might not be imposed, because although the city can recommend conditions to the WAPC, they might decide not to impose those conditions. But when the WAPC considered the MRS amendment, they agreed with the city that contributions would be required, but they decided or they resolved that it should be later in the planning process. And we believe the structure plan, and that's why they agreed for a structure plan to be prepared, believe this is the right stage of the planning process. If we leave it too late, potentially there may be further issues. In terms of the delay of the process, most of the delay was as a result of the environmental issues.
So through you, Deputy Mayor, if I could just amplify. I think the difference through a local structure plan and a local development plan is the local structure plan gives more control. I think as part of the preparation of a local structure plan, we will be able to articulate all of the infrastructure contributions that we would expect. If we leave it to a subdivision process, the likelihood is we'll be successful in negotiating 10% public open space and potentially the development of that public open space, but it would be more challenging in terms of potentially land for road widening, and also if council, through a community facilities plan, wanted some contribution towards broader community infrastructure, it would be challenging to try and achieve that through just a subdivision process. And that's partly why I think we think, A, because it gives stronger control, and B, because I think it would make sure that we have the ability to dictate through the approvals process all of the community infrastructure and normal subdivision infrastructure we would expect.
So, and I understand what you're wanting to achieve. I guess my issue as the ward councillor is this is a development, as we know, for a retirement home, retirement village, whatever they're going to do down there with high to low care. The issue I have is how do you get to agree on what you want to do as far as the DCP goes, because that's what you're really wanting, when the local structure plan is only for those 4 lots, which is 8 hectares. So we know that there needs to be a bit of land on the Dundebar roadside. You've mentioned that again tonight. But apart from the public open space, I'm not sure what else and how you're going to facilitate that if you don't agree to either gifting of the land or whatever, whether it's a dollar value. I think before we were looking for a dollar value. So how are you going to come to an arrangement? Because this obviously goes up to the Planning Commission for ratification. They may very well again go back and say, no, you're reaching too much. So I'm just trying to understand how administration can progress this, one, in a timely manner, but also come to a contribution rate that is clearly going to be beneficial for the community on both aspects. One, we get our retirement village and high care facilities, and secondly, there is some opportunity that we get to obviously have some land for the road widening on the northern part.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, so the contributions that we're seeking it's just the contributions that we usually require. If this was anywhere else, we would require the widening of the regional road, we would require 10% POS. And just to give you an indication, previously, the proponent was only willing to provide 1% POS, and usually we require 10% POS, so we don't consider that to be unreasonable. So, and also the development of the POS is a contribution that we always require in any development. In terms of the community facilities, that is one that's a bit less, I suppose, more grey in terms of contributions, like the director mentioned. But that's why we require a needs assessment to be undertaken as part of that. So just to give the applicant an opportunity to prove that they might need less contribution for community facilities or they might not need it at all, and that just provides that flexible mechanism that we can then discuss with them further on that one aspect. But the state planning policy allows local governments to require community facilities as well.
Yeah, I do understand that. So if this retirement village was operating a podiatrist or other services for people and the community could go there and use those services, would that also then be deemed to be part of their community benefit or not?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that wouldn't be considered as part of that. But what we have discussed previously is that it could potentially be a contribution for, because the 55s, over 55s living, they still require, they still very mobile and use community facilities in the area, that the contribution could potentially be for that component, whilst the nursing home or the higher care facilities proportion may not require contributions because the in-house services could potentially cater for that proportion of the development. So there are things that can be done. It's not that we require for everybody. That's what the needs assessment needs to provide us with information, because that proponent, and we've discussed it with them, they could come back and say the 55 component, they could require contributions for that, but potentially not for the aged care. But we need to leave it to that assessment process to look into that further.
Through you, Chair, if I can just amplify again, this is a very challenging process because there's a standard approach to how we deal with development within the city, and typically a developer contributions plan is provided over a large area like the East Wanneroo District Structure Plan area. Dealing with piecemeal, incremental proposals like this makes it very challenging because the planning process isn't necessarily geared up to address these types of issues. I think Emil's correct in putting forward the argument that there may or there may not be a requirement for community facilities contribution. The preparation of the structure plan will enable us to flesh out if there is a requirement, and if so, what that would be. And then it would still be for council, as part of its assessment of the structure plan, to determine whether that's fair and reasonable and there's a need and nexus in alignment with the state planning policy requirements. That's the best process for us to progress the need or otherwise of any broader community facilities. Remember, this is and as Emil pointed out on the attachment, this is an area of land that's sandwiched between the future East Wanneroo District Structure Plan area and Cell 3, for which developer contributions are required. And it's about being fair and reasonable. It's about making sure that all development contribute equally and fairly towards future infrastructure needs, rather than one development contributing nothing and others contributing more because of the lack of contribution from one other area. So it's about fairness and equity. It's about need and nexus. This isn't the time to consider that. This is just the amendment to align our district, our DCP with the approach that's been taken elsewhere. So the structure plan is the right mechanism to deal with that level of detail, not as part of this scheme amendment.
So just to finalise it, if you're doing a local structure plan over this 8 hectares, you're only going to be doing a DCP over that 8 hectares. You can't obviously include what may happen in East Wanneroo into this local structure plan.
Just for clarification, it wouldn't necessarily need to be a developer contributions plan. The process of preparing one is quite onerous. It could be that we enter into an agreement with the landowners, so with that agreement would indicate that an area of land is required for Dundebar Road widening, so that isn't part of any future development. We would indicate the need for them to provide 10% public open space within that 8 hectares. And that would be made available to the broader community that would be able to access. And it may just be a financial amount that would contribute towards broader community facilities. And I wouldn't imagine it would be a significant amount, but it would help contribute towards the city's provision of community infrastructure into the future. And council may make a decision not to do that as part of the structure plan process, or it may decide that it's fair and reasonable to do so. The structure plan enables that discussion to occur, which is why we're suggesting that rather than the local development plan.
Councillor, excuse me, Councillor Aitken first, then Councillor Civic.
Look, this might be completely out of left field, but I'm looking at it here and the subject site is very small, and you're talking about premature development or ad hoc development. why don't we just annex it to cell 3? And I know there's legal implications, or apply similar conditions to it to cell 3 to keep it within, because what you're doing is you're changing the boundaries that are similar and just including it, it's right next door. Why do we have to do everything separate? Because this site needs to be developed as soon as possible to provide jobs and facilities for our community. I know there's legal ramifications, but there might be some way of using the precept of that to be able to go with that site rather than having to go through a whole heap of palaver or consider East Wanneroo.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So to do that, to include it in cell 3 would mean we need to do a scheme amendment, which is actually a longer process than what we anticipate the structure plan to take. So we will have to amend the planning scheme and also get input from public consultation with all the other landowners in cell 3. So that will be a longer process. In terms of, it was taken out of the district structure, East Wanneroo district structure plan by the state government. So that's why we're looking, it is essentially between the two approaches in terms of developer contributions, and we propose this to be looking at the particular requirements of the site. That's why we have pretty much standard requirements for this in terms of the public open space and the widening of the road. And as we've discussed, the community facilities part will be dependent on the feasibility study that we will consider.
Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. Would I be right in saying this is, well, it is a standalone development, but this is a commercial company. They're not in it for love, they're in it to make a reasonable profit. My question is that this particular standalone 8 hectares will be looked at separately from the remainder of cell 3, which is Dundebar, Belgrade and Franklin. So will there be any impost on the remainder of that cell in terms of developer contributions, or we'll just look at it under normal circumstances as to whichever way the developer contributions go? That's my question on that. So, but basically, you know, this is a commercial company. They're not in it. They're there to make money, which is fair enough. So, thank you.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So you would remember that we had a scheme amendment last year on cell 3 where we required, we reduced the contribution so that the remainder area to the north would contribute to Dundebar Road as well. So that provided equity between the cell 3 landowners at the moment and the future residents of that area to the north. In the same way, this will link with that in terms of also requiring contributions for Dundebar Road and then the standard provisions of POS. So we believe that's a fair and equitable approach for all the landowners in that whole area.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? There being none. Mr Dixon, you had any other items to speak to, or?
No, Deputy Mayor, happy to take questions.
Okay, councillors, we'll take them from the top, and we'll look for questions on item 4.1. Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Mr Dixon, on 4.1, and I have read the report, and it is quite well prepared. I guess one of the questions I have again, this is to not necessarily speed up a process, but obviously to make sure that we're aligning ourselves to be able to meet the demands of developers and also our community. In the submission by Quito and their representative, Len Kosovar, he talks about trying to apply some interim contribution on cell 2. Currently it's at $25,000 and they're suggesting that maybe as part of this process it could be reduced to $15,000. And the reason for that is because obviously the original cell costs were done on 9 lots per hectare, and now they're going to 15 lots per hectare. So I understand all of the ramifications. I also understand what you wrote in your report. But would it not achieve some benefit to not only the city but also the applicant that we could also put into the commission, because they've both got to go to the commission if you're changing a cell cost, why you couldn't do it at the same time just to make that process smoother? Because if they don't approve it, then they don't approve the reduction in the cell costs. So we're not going to lose out in any way. And the report sort of indicates that if we've got to wait for one thing to happen before we do another, well, I would like to see if we could do it in parallel.
It's a good question. So we have obviously given some consideration to the submission that was made by Mr. Kosovo on behalf of Quito or Benares. We're not ruling out the option, obviously, of trying to reduce the infrastructure cost per lot. But what we are saying quite strongly is the appropriate mechanism to do that is through the annual review process. So having discussed it with the applicant's representative, I think he understands that they can make submissions as part of the upcoming annual review for that to occur, and that's the right process for consideration by council to reduce the infrastructure cost per lot as a result of this amendment. Administration's preference, as indicated in here, is there's a normal process. You deal with a scheme amendment, and then you've got certainty once the scheme amendment is approved and it's gazetted, then that gives you the certainty. If you don't, if for whatever reason that doesn't get endorsed, and for argument's sake, if council accepts a reduced level of contribution of, say, by $10,000 per lot, it could be quite challenging. You have to have legal agreements. You'd also, if it didn't happen, you'd then have to try and claw back the money, the reduced amount that subdivisor had paid in that interim period. So our preference is to go through the annual review process to get some certainty as part of that. And also the calculation of what that reduced amount should be, that needs to be done thoroughly by administration to work out exactly what the amount of the lower level of contribution should be. The developer in preparing the scheme amendment has given an indicative cost. We need to work through exactly what that is based on, because you'll appreciate infrastructure costs are going up at the moment. The cost of acquiring land for public open space, the cost to deliver roads are going up. That's all done as part of the annual review process, and that would give council an exact figure of what the reduced infrastructure cost per lot should be, and that for that reason we are of the view that do that through the annual review process.
Yeah, and the report states all that. I guess what I was sort of indicating that you're suggesting in the report that to do this particular process could take anything from 6 to 12 months, depending on the process going through the commission. I understand that, but then. So we're not going to make any changes probably this year when we do the 12-monthly review. It will be another year, and then that's got to go through a process as well. So effectively, it's almost going to be 20 months, 24 months before we may review that cell cost in our normal process and manner. I'm just trying to align us with what's happening out there, I guess, in the development world, where they're trying to bring land on at a reasonable pace so they can obviously meet the demand of the expectations of buyers. I'm just trying to see whether administration can align itself in such a way that, yes, totally agree with what the report's saying, but the real world is changing a little bit quicker sometimes, and 24 months it's a long way away.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. We're not necessarily saying 24 months. In my view, the proper mechanism to deal with this is deal with the scheme amendment, have certainty that the scheme amendment's been endorsed, and then through a quick annual review, change the infrastructure cost per lot. It would be up for council to determine as part of this current annual review whether council wishes to reduce the infrastructure cost per lot as part of this annual review, which will be coming to council shortly. Now, the amendment process isn't the right process for you to do that, but the annual review process is absolutely the right process to go through. So if council is mindful to want or request administration to consider that as part of the upcoming annual review, that's something that we could do on your behalf. But it will add to the administrative burden of having legal agreements with all those that subdivide in this interim period prior to the gazettal of the scheme amendment, which does run risks.
Councillor Savetan.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. My question in relation to this, I fully understand the from 9 to 15 lot and the reduction in the costing, but when we look at this total structure plan over the, when it's approved, will council administration be looking at the urban tree canopy? Because that's one of the items in the agenda tonight. And I know we've looked at all the old suburbs, etc., under that particular item, but will we be looking at that? Because I know Quito or Banara, all their land is practically all cleared, as it was for the nursery at the time. But with Ingham's, etc., there may be that. I mean, by increasing the R codes, it's going to create a lot more lots. So will administration be looking at that aspect? You know, instead of getting 15 lots, we may settle on a different R code on that particular area. Is that a fair question? Yep.
Yeah, that's, thank you for the question. So in terms of urban tree canopy and provision of trees, that will be considered as part of the local structure plan and subsequent subdivision stages, not as part of a scheme amendment to change the DCP cost. But absolutely, I think, and that's interesting, the next, or one of the next items on the agenda is to deal with the urban forest strategy that council will hopefully consider. But as part of this process, as part of the Ingham site, retention of trees in public open space, retention of trees within the public realm, and additional street tree planting will all be considered as part of that process, not the amendment process.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? There's none. 4.2 we've done. 4.3, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just two questions, easy ones, I'm sure. My first question is the urban tree forest strategy. When we go to look at a suburb that has become a bit of a heat sink or whatever, are we looking, or whether subdivisional approvals or our other areas of our agency, are they looking at what the tree canopy was in that area prior to development before we go ahead and replant just about anything because we think we might need to meet a certain standard? So are we going back to what that area may have looked like originally? Apart from the scrub, there were some trees. Is that what we're trying to do here as well, is to replant what was somewhat destroyed as part of the development?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So what we have done as part of this strategy is we've analysed the whole city and we've analysed the tree canopy cover in the city as it stood, basically as it was last year, late last year. So we now, for the first time, we actually have mapping of the whole city. We know exactly where the heat islands are, where the trees are, where there's shortages. That's why we're proposing that we focus our tree planting on the areas that have the suburbs with less than 5%, to get all the suburbs up to 5% and then gradually increase it after that. But importantly, what you mentioned is a lot of it is the planning system is failing to protect trees as part of the planning and development process. So that's why, although there's been some improvements in the planning process to allow dedicated areas for trees as part of developments, it's not going far enough. So that's why we're proposing as part of the strategies, as part of the strategy, excuse the pun, is that we actually, a main pillar of the strategy is to advocate the state government to get the subdivision and the planning policies changed so that we can actually protect more trees. But that is obviously a longer process. It's something that we need to do. The state government is aware of it. Trees is a very important issue for many local governments at the moment. So that's what we're proposing as part of this. But in terms of, this is now we've got the information now to know where we need more trees, and that's where this will focus the tree planting.
I guess just to follow up from that answer, in some of our areas, it would be just as beneficial to have some bushes as well. Trees are one thing, and some of the trees we plant don't shade anything, but bushes would be more of a, to try and cut down on that heat sink, especially in some of those, covering footpaths and stuff like that. So are we including having bushes or bush put back in underneath the tree canopy where it can grow?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, you're correct. Although we talk about tree canopy cover, and that's kind of the main theme of the strategy, we're also talking about vegetation. So it's about all vegetation, native, non-native, on private land, outside of on public land. We're counting all of that vegetation. So because it's reducing the hard surfaces, which is the real cause for the higher temperatures. So that's why it's two-pronged. It's about the trees, but also about the vegetation, as you mentioned. And that's where our local biodiversity strategy also plays a role, where it actually identifies areas that's got high-quality vegetation, that we retain those.
Oh, that sounds really good, because wood chips is not very good vegetation. The other part of my question is, and this has been raised several times, this is the other question. When we plant trees, verges in the middle of roads and the like, they're somewhat okay, but it's been brought to my attention in some of the older suburbs that I have, like up in Carramar and Tapping, that people are starting to have, trees are starting to grow, as they do, to a height where they're starting to shade people's solar panels. So is there any anything that the administration's doing to maybe help with that, bearing in mind that we're wanting people to put solar panels on their houses all over the place? So what are we doing to handle that aspect? Because even in old parts of Wanneroo, people are getting their panels shielded by large trees.
I will refer to the manager parks for that.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, our street tree policy provides a framework of how we maintain our street trees and provide provision and guidance in regards to when we will prune a tree or when we remove a tree, etc. Whilst we look to work with residents to cater for solar panels and extensions to property and so forth and development, we do that in accordance with Australian standards for the pruning of street trees and the management of trees. So when we look at our street tree planting, and certainly through the urban forest strategy, what we look to achieve, we'll look to align the species of planting that's suitable for the relevant streetscape. So, not looking to hinder development or, the installation of solar panels, but also, working with the residents to, with existing trees, not to remove the tree, but look what we can do as far as cultural practices to enhance the tree and protect the tree, but also meet the needs of the community.
Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm just looking at the map on page 89, and I realise that's the most current map, but if one were to look at that map during the 1960s, all of the strip between Yanchep or Two Rocks all the way down to our southern boundary would have been all red, because there were pastoral companies through there, and it's been diffused by Mindari and the urban development through there. So based on that philosophy, and that includes East Wanneroo, by the way, and Carabooda, where all the land's been cleared for market gardening. So based on that policy, these are going to be all part of our planning schemes to enhance tree development from now on, and so that we can actually create a cooling effect along that along our coastal and interior, to make sure that we can actually bring some form of climate change into practice, as well as trying to make sure that the pine trees remain there or are replaced by other species to keep the city of Wanneroo as cool as possible. Is that a fair question? Yeah?
Thank you, councillors. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So the approach that we're recommending is that we focus on where the trees are needed the most. So those are the suburbs with less than 5% tree cover at the moment. And then after that, we will be looking at, as a stage 2, look at heat islands outside of those 5% suburbs. And some of these heat islands could potentially be part of that stage 2, because obviously we only have a limited amount of trees that we can plant. So what we're doing, we're changing the methodology to focus where we can get the best outcomes. And these heat islands that you mentioned would be part of those areas that we will be focusing on.
That was interesting, Councillor Civic. You actually made a long, broad observation, then said, is that a fair question? Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I have a couple of questions. I don't know if they're more suitable for the Parks and Gardens team, but I'll give it a go. So the street tree and the verge tree policy, I think, is one of the clear aspects of this urban forest strategy. I was just wondering if administration could comment on the uptake of the number of people who are requesting street trees.
Mr. Shuttleberg.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. Looking at the last 5 years, the residential requests make up about 14% of our annual program. On average, over the last 5 years, we receive around 400 requests for street trees out of our 3,000 trees that we plant. Where they come from in the city, a lot of them in the north of the city. Obviously, we've got our lower sort of canopy coverage areas up there. But yeah, consistently, it's around that 14% over the last 5 years.
Thank you. The second part of the question, anecdotally, I think a few of us hear situations where street trees are planted and then either not maintained or potentially even removed by some residents because they don't like the appearance of it, etc. I was just wondering if administration could comment on that, if there's any sort of trends or feedback that's been provided through to the city about situations where street trees are planted and then potentially removed either by residents or other people as well.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. We don't have any actual trends that we've picked up. We do monitor our newly planted trees through our street tree watering program. So each tree that we plant, we manually water for a 2-year period to give the trees the best chance of establishment. Through that watering, we can identify any trees that are struggling or are failing or have indeed been removed. So any trees that have been removed, if we receive information around the removal, then obviously we investigate that. And any trees that have been removed, we'll replace in the next year's planting program. So as far as maintenance of those trees, we continue maintenance, fairly intensive maintenance of those trees outside of the watering for a 3 to 5 year period. So we've improved our practices over the last few years of, putting a tree in and asking our residents to water it and, hoping it survives, to doing the watering over the 2 year period and then all of the formative pruning to create a tree on residential verges. Through that process, we generally pick up any trees that have been removed or vandalised, any trees that need to be replaced, then we'll add to our next year's watering program, planting program.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, if I could just also clarify in terms of before the assets are handed over to our Assets Directorate to manage and maintain, we do have issues in new development areas where a developer will plant trees as part of their development, and then those trees get damaged or destroyed or removed, either through contractors or builders, or the residents indeed removing those trees, particularly as they're young saplings and they don't put any value associated with that. So that is a challenge for us, and that's certainly something that we're looking at improving, whether that's we receive an amount of money from developers, and then when the street is pretty much established, then we can go in and use that money to plant the trees and maintain them, which will give them a better chance of survival. That's something that, with our assets colleagues, we're looking at the best process for us to ensure that when trees are planted through new developments, they've got a very good chance of surviving.
And the last part of the question was, does our strategy adjust our watering practices depending on the level of rainfall each year? Because I imagine if we go through periods of extended drought, are we consciously sort of trying to plant trees that that don't require as much either rainfall or groundwater to be able to survive over time?
Mr Shoulderbeck.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. As I addressed in the last question, we water our trees for the first 2 years for establishment. So we work that on 40 litres of water per tree per week during the drier season. We don't irrigate, we don't have fixed irrigation on those trees, but we find that the manual watering gives us the best opportunity to ensure the trees establish. There's a number of factors that we base species selection on. Obviously, we look for trees that are native to WA and Australia. Stock availability is also an issue for us, and probably becoming a bigger issue as we're in the times we are with related to materials and so forth around COVID. And also the planting environment, so the location that it's being planted in is a big factor in the type of tree that we put in. So, for example, you know, we don't look at putting Norfolk Island pines on residential verges or casuarinas and so forth that drop a lot of leaf litter. It's got to suit the location that it's going into.
And I think we move across to, for the first time this evening, the right-hand side of the room. Councillor Nguyen, you had a question?
Thank you. Just in relation to the budget or the costs, by redirecting or prioritising these planting to the heat islands or the heat areas, there's no increase to the city's budget in managing these trees. And if that was the case, will we reach the target that we set in the report? That's to cover a minimum of 5% by 2040 in the suburbs identified?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So, yes, you're correct that we are not proposing to increase the number of trees that we plant every year, but we are proposing to change the approach that we follow. Now that we have the information to know where the heat islands are and the suburbs that have less than 5%, now we can actually focus our tree planting better to actually maximize the results. So we believe that this approach would actually, it's a balanced approach, and within the current financial considerations that this is achievable. But bearing in mind that this strategy will be an ongoing document, a document that's alive and that we will be bringing back. Importantly, what we will be doing as part of this is monitor the progress to actually measure are we actually making a difference, and how can we actually change the strategy to increase its effectiveness. So that's a very important element of this. Our assets colleagues, they are doing a street tree audit, and that's a rolling program across many suburbs. So as part of that, it identifies where potential trees can be planted and also it will help us with the monitoring of the progress of this. But importantly, the tree planting is just one aspect of this. Advocating the state government, because that's where we can really effect a lot of change, because that's getting to the real problem issue of subdivision and development, and how we can actually protect more trees through that process. And the other key aspect of this is to community awareness about the importance of trees and maintaining trees. So we believe, and that's got a negligible financial impact on the organisation. So we believe that will contribute substantially to the success.
In terms of if we were to propose a tree being planted on a verge in front of someone's house, what is a resident's right to protest with that proposed planting? Is there any right for them to do that? Or do they get, I don't know, a say? Or do they get notified? What's the process?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, our street tree policy provides guidance on an allocation of a minimum of one street per residential verge. What administration would do where we're looking at doing, for example, if we're going through a street that's been identified as tree planting, we would do a letter drop in the street. We would advise the community what we're doing, how we're doing it, and give them some options in regards to street trees. If individual residents did come back and have any concerns, then we'd address those in accordance with our street tree policy to find an outcome. But our street tree policy clearly defines that there will be a minimum of one street tree per residential verge. That's very consistent with the approach across all local governments, certainly across the metropolitan area.
Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I've got a few questions. The first one being, obviously, the types of trees that we're going to have. I know people are very, they seem to be getting very offended by the bottle bush, but the bottle bushes obviously grow to a certain height and are easy to maintain. So my question is, if we don't use bottle bushes, how tall is a canopy going to be expected to grow to, and over what period of time will the height be reached on maturity of these trees? So will it take until 2040 to reach maturity, or are we going to put a faster growing tree in, and are we going to have a bigger canopy and not just use bottle bushes?
For clarity, I think they might actually be bottle brushes, but...
Oh, brushes, yeah.
Mr. Shuttleberg.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. When you're looking at canopy, you're not necessarily looking at just height of canopy. You're looking at the spread of a canopy. So, an increasing canopy cover can be achieved through multiple species of trees. It's not, necessarily looking to have the highest canopy out there. And going back to Councillor Miles' question before around solar panels, we are very mindful at administration level in regards to matching the species of tree to the environment. So whilst we have planted a lot of bottle brushes or callistemons, certainly through our arterial road networks over the last few years, that's mainly because of main road standards in regards to planting trees that are frangible, so at a mature diameter breast height, they're no more than 100 millimetres, so if they're impacted by a vehicle, they'll actually snap in half. But we will look to create species that are suitable to the location, and we are very mindful of trees, the characteristics of trees, and we'll plant them accordingly, depending on where they're going to go within the streetscape.
Councillor Huntley.
My second question is, obviously when we develop communities, there are undeveloped sites left in any development. How are we going to, or how will, this affect the BAL if these sites are undeveloped for a period of time and the trees grow up? Is that going to be an issue with the BAL in the future for these sites?
Mr. Shuttleberg. Oh, okay then, I tried.
I'd like Mr. Shuttleberg to answer that question, but I think it's more of a planning issue than
Yeah, it would have been impressive, I suppose, yes. Mr Dixon.
Look, the answer to that question is it could. Most of our new development areas, obviously, they pretty much develop within 2 years or so it shouldn't be an issue if street trees are planted. If a site is left for too long, and the street trees mature and perhaps there's an area of open space adjacent, and it could affect the BAL rating and the BAL assessment and therefore the construction techniques. But each proposal will be considered on its merits, and given the example that you provided, I don't think it's going to create an issue from just street trees themselves.
Okay, so we could more or less say that we will not be sterilising a block because the trees have matured around, that now it will reach a standard of BAL 40 or something, and then they can't develop.
Well, anybody, I think it's highly unlikely that scenario would occur. However, each proposal would be assessed on its merits, and they'd have to undertake, if it was required, a BAL assessment. And then whatever that BAL rating came in at would determine the construction level to maintain the safety of the future residents of that property.
It's going to be an interesting one in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Nguyen.
Have we got a list of trees that are part of what's been considered for this proposal? Because talking about the type of trees reminds me there was a resident that I was aware of, her name was Maureen, who stepped over a gum nut and hurt herself. And so that sort of creates some liability for us in the future. So I don't know if gum trees are on that list or not.
Mr Shuttleberg, I think I'm right on this occasion. You'd be the responder.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. The city does have a street tree master plan that's several years old now and probably not as relevant as was when it was developed, and that will be reviewed as part of this process and be amended accordingly.
Councillor Sangeli.
I'm getting the crystal ball out and I've moved on to stage 2. You talked about advocating to the state government and looking at the next list of suburbs after the 5%. I know a lot of them have above ground power, which severely limits where we can stick trees on our verges. And I would dearly love a street tree on my verge, but unfortunately I have an above ground power pole that catches on fire at least every 2 years. So I'm not willing to take that risk. So if we could add on with the state government for underground power, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you. As part of the, through you, Deputy Mayor, as part of the advocacy, we will be considering that in terms of our communications to the state government. But in terms of, that's the example that you mentioned, that's where our street tree audit is so important, because essentially we going through the suburbs and identify where there's space to actually plant trees. So the power lines would be I suppose, a limitation on that, and then it will be assessed where the trees can be planted. So when we get to stage 2 and we get to focus on the heat islands, then we're going to coordinate our approach with the street tree audit so that we actually know where we can physically plant the trees, because that's one of the challenges, is actually find a space to plant them.
And I think it's also probably worth pointing out that, and part of the conversation we recently had around the future of East Wanneroo urbanisation, part of the discussion I think needs to be around road reserve widths to make sure that there's sufficient room for utilities, but also sufficient room for street trees, so that we're not compromising and having a narrow road reserve width that doesn't enable us to achieve both safely. And that's some of the conversations that we're having, I think, that will also flow through to conversations with developers and the Commission and the Department of Planning.
Are there any further questions on this item, councillors? Councillor Aitken.
Sorry, I just want to keep this quick. My trees died again on my verge, And I suspect that something has been dumped by the builder historically that is preventing that happening. Can we incorporate in the policy that there's not builders' rubbish dumped like that would damage further tree growth and that? You know, we just need to be mindful of that, because often they just don't grow, and we can do whatever we want to put something there, but they just don't grow. So that's just a suggestion that you might like to consider. Thank you.
I think we just take that on notice. Yep, thank you. Further questions on this item, councillors? No, we then move on to item 4.4. Are there any questions? We have nominations in for the 4 vacant positions. There's no questions. Item 4.5, Councillor Miles.
I guess really just for administration, this is for the petition that I tabled at our last OCM with regard to the Neves Road Meridian amendment, number 198, which was the caravan car parking amendment. Is it possible for the director to use that petition when they do get a development application to obviously use the comments within that petition from the residents with regard to processing the DA for that site?
That's a good question. That's not typically the process that we would go through, and it's about important from my perspective to give surety to the petitioners that their comments would be taken into consideration. The normal process is that there would be a development application, and the adjacent residents would be consulted as part of that process to provide any input and comments. And I think that's a safer and a better process for us to take, because obviously circumstances change, rather than retaining this petition and then considering that as part of any future development application.
Further questions, councillors? There are none. 4.6. Any questions? There are none. Thank you, Mr. Dixon, Mr. Van Huygen. We now move on to assets. Good. Welcome, Mr. Singh.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. From Assets Directorate, I got 6 reports on the agenda tonight, and I'm not intending to present those reports. I'm happy to take questions on all those items.
Okay, councillors, then from the top, 4.7, Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. In particular, my question's about the e-ridables, just given that they've been in the news quite a lot lately. In addition to the regulation and the speed enforcement, that's the responsibility of the state, I was just wondering if our cycle plan can also include some advocacy for more signage, whether that signage be cautioning excessive speeds or reminding riders that that the paths usually have a shared use as well for both pedestrians, cyclists, riders of all kinds. And I don't know if that would be advocacy to Main Roads WA, but I was just hoping that the plan could include that advocacy in there, just given the focus on e-ridables that's been in the news lately.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, there is a reference in the cycle plan, section 3.7.4 on e-ridable signage. But having said that, it is the City of Wanneroo's responsibility for such signage on footpaths or shared paths. It's not main roads. Generally, our view is that you would need those signage where there's a heavy pedestrian traffic and there is a conflict with potential of e-ridables. So that's where we could consider having some additional signage. Otherwise, majority of the cases, you probably wouldn't need the signage.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Any further questions? Yep, Councillor Coetzee.
Thank you. On page 152, it's about the PSP. Number 2, the letter that the Mayor have written to the Minister of Transport and the Member of Butler, and the letter that the CEO have written to the Director of Metronet. I don't think I've read anything, but did we get a response back from those areas?
Mr. Singh.
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor, I may have to ask Director of Planning and Sustainability, Mr. Dixon, if he recalls receiving a response on that.
I'd have to take that question on notice and provide a response.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Councillor Kurt, yes?
Also, if we haven't received any response back, is there any way that we can follow it up by any chance?
So pending the taking it on notice and getting a response, I would imagine that would be normal course of action.
Thank you.
Yes. Further questions, councillors? There are none. Item 4.8, Councillor Miles.
Thank you. This is in regard to the Eiffel Tower replacement. And obviously the community consultation and engagement's been very good. And most of the community does want the just a shade area, I see, with some seating underneath that. And I think the indication is some solar lighting. And that's in next year's proposed budget. That's all in the report, which is all good. With regards to the existing structure, does administration sort of put that out for anybody that may wish to take it away?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, not at this stage. As part of our removal of that one, we can consider to include that as an optional item in the procurement for the new shade structure there.
And with regard to the solar lighting, are you referring to the lighting being on standalone towers, or the lighting within the gazebo effect and the panels on the roof?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, that will be part of the detailed design when we do it, like how that would go. Mainly is for the lighting inside. How that is then designed and placed will be subject to detailed design.
And understand it is the detailed design. Is there something that you can do about the, because this is going to be a lot of concrete laid to put this in place, whether we can have a concrete that doesn't look like concrete, but obviously it's not a trip hazard for other people that need to have accessibility, because these parks and some of this equipment looks absolutely brilliant. But sometimes I think to try and reduce possible maintenance in the future, some of these concrete plinths and stuff do look pretty ugly, and they do, take it away from what the community's expectations are when we do such a good job elsewhere.
Yes, through you, Deputy Mayor, we'll take that note. I'll taking the note on that one. We'll definitely consider that as part of the design of what materials and can be used for this particular site.
And if it's up for sale, Mr. Singh, I'm out for a garden ornament at my place, provided I don't need to upset Mr. Dixon for any planning approvals.
I think my nature reserve needs it more.
Council, is there any other questions on this item? There's nil. We move on to 4.9. Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I was hoping the Director could just clarify the column on page 195, point score, which is on the second table. Just clarifying the impact of that point score. So how is it calculated and what consideration is afforded to those points by Main Roads WA in the selection process for which projects are actually given approval? For instance, is it a higher score that would be attributed a more favourable rating, or is it a lower score that you're looking for?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, this particular, the process entails quite comprehensive analysis of the guidelines. Main Roads WA issues guidelines every year more or less the guidelines remain static, but with some minor adjustments from year to year. The guidelines do require the minimum traffic volumes for roads to be considered. The roads have to be of a certain hierarchy. And then we need to consider what traffic volume it carries, the condition of the road, like surface, the ruts or any deformations on the road, and then the treatment we are recommending. And then at the end, the cost. So there is a matrix of all these factors, which then calculates the score. So that we use main road standard process. Not only us, the whole of metro area uses the same process. And all submissions then go to main roads, and they are put in one list, and they get audited by main roads external auditor, and to verify the scores which we have calculated. Then the projects are funded based on the order of merit, subject to each council's funding limit is capped. At the moment, that cap is $750,000 per year. It has changed last couple of years, depending on the pool of funds available at metro level. It could go to 800 or 850, but the cap is, as per the guidelines, 750. So the project which score high in the order of merit, and each council cuts out at 750.
Having been the chair of the Metropolitan Regional Roads Board for several years, it is rigorous and rigid, the process. Councillor Herridge, welcome.
Thank you, Deputy. Sorry, I might be putting you on the spot here, but I just wanted to clarify a couple of points. I noticed and just wanted to confirm we've missed the deadline for this year, so this will be in for next?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the submissions are always 12 months ahead. These are for 23-24, not 22-23. Yep. So when we miss the deadline, in a sense, when Main Roads releases the guidelines and the time it takes to prepare those submissions in line with the guidelines, generally doesn't line up with the council meetings. Yep. So we submit the submissions, but with a qualifying statement that these are still subject to council endorsement. So after council endorses, hopefully next week, we'll let Main Roads know now council has formally endorsed these submissions.
Cool, thank you. And just the second one, I noticed that there's, of course, one in there for the Southwest Ward, along Mirrabooka and Kingsway. I've been racking my brain since today, because I didn't come that way today. I've gone the back way. And I've just realised it's Kingsway side, not Mirrabooka. Do we have enough road reserve there to do that? Is that always been in the planning?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, the concept we have done, we can fit in that concept in the existing road reserve. So that should be sufficient to fit it in.
Further questions, councillors? There's none. Now, councillors, we're moving on to items 4.10, 11 and 12. And if there are any questions on these items, we may need to go behind closed doors. So I'll take them one at a time. 4.10, Councillor Rowe. Is it anything of confidential nature that's included in the Okay.
This is just a question in terms of the recommendation. It says on page 205, noting the 699,378. I was reading up on the minutes from when this item was last discussed, I think on 15th of June 21, before I came onto council. I just wanted to clarify with the director if those funds were being taken out of the DCP Cell 9 developer contributions, or if that was being funded through municipal funds.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, they are the DCP funds.
Yep, right. Any further questions, councillors, on 4.10? There's, on 4.10? Okay, now, if this is anything to do with any of the confidential information, councillors, if I could just make sure that that's the case. Councillor Nguyen?
Just in relation to the allocation of the percentage in the selection criteria, and we have buy local 10%. Did we set that as part of our policy, or was that something that's been sort of set by administration?
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor, the policy doesn't set the exact percentage. Administration does that. So each tender, when we look at what's the scope of that particular procurement we are going to do, and then we allocate percentage on that basis.
And how do we go about, I guess personally, I like to see that percentage to increase, because I guess my preference would be if we can choose a local business for the city's project, that would be better than someone who's not within the city.
Mr. Singh?
Yeah, through you, Deputy Mayor, look, that's possible, but that could also limit the market as well. So depending upon the type of work we are doing, there is always going to be benefit to the local business if they meet all the criteria and they achieve the best score out, even the weighting is 10%. One is, tender evaluation process is not simple mathematics. We assign the scores, then we rank those tenders. Tenders who achieve the minimum scores, then we do the relative value for money analysis. And we also consider the different aspects which each tender brings to the table, such as being local, what material they're going to use. All those criteria we do, then go back and look at the performance, do some risk analysis on that as well, before we form a recommendation to the preferred tender. So the value for money is not just simple mathematical based on the ratings and the scores, it's more than that. So even if 10% is provided, if we increase that weighting, that could result in limiting the market where we may not get the good value for money tenders for our projects.
I guess I'm considering more on the line that if we were to be able to support our local businesses, that in turn will create jobs within our community, and will also grow the local sort of businesses over time. So we may not get the cost saving or the value now, but in future, that's something that will benefit the city overall. So that's where I think 10% may not be sort of high enough to attract and retain the local industry.
Mr. CEO?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I think Councillor Newell's question is a fair question. It might be best asked when we review our purchasing and procurement policy, just to understand the balance between, I guess, value for money and providing a local purchasing preference. Certainly, Council was very strong at wanting to provide a weighting in the policy originally. I can't recall when it's due to be reviewed, but we can probably provide Council some data on how successful the current practice is, and that would provide some good data to form the basis of a review.
Yes, I think part of this sort of reasoning was, I remember that there was, I think, a tender where most of it was granted to one particular person. I think 11 out of the 12 or 13 sort of proposal in the past, and we this was, I think, to do with one of the road project that we sort of granted to a particular business. So I thought, if we can consider other businesses out there, that will be a lot better than just one single business that may always beat other competitors in terms of value.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the question is relevant to this particular item, but I'd also say that whilst there is a principle of buy local, there is always the budgetary aspects, and those principles may put upward pressure on our very tight budget position. So there's always that difficult contest and tension that we've always, and I'm sure administration take that into consideration too. Councillor Heritage, do you have a...
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just a couple of questions. One, to say I'm super excited to see this actually coming through, which is awesome, because residents have been waiting and advocating for a long time. And I also know, being a parent and a school parent, I know that they're going to be a little concerned over a few things. One just being that the space that's there that's being used is already obviously a car park. Are we able to have a look at when this is actually constructed, so it's done possibly through a school holiday period to at least keep it as less disruptive to the parents, because it is used as an overflow parking. That would be awesome. And there's also quite a considerable amount of tree canopy that's already there. We've considered that as well, obviously, with the shade sale that's possibly going in, just to make sure that we're not clearing or keeping the clearing down to a minimum. Thank you.
Mr. Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. The duration of this project is about 5 months. So it's going to be difficult to contain all of that in school holidays. So it'll be a construction site. So there will be some impact on the parents who are driving to the school. And the second one with the clearing, we'll be clearing only whatever is bare minimum required to deliver this project. So we'll identify the clearing which is required as per the footprint which is on the detailed design, and rest will be maintained.
Yeah, Mr. CEO.
I'm sure the director, however, will liaise with the school and discuss our construction program with the school and work with them to minimise the disruption as much as possible.
Any further questions on this item, councillors? There's none. For 11, Councillor Rowe, and again with a disclaimer, we just need to be careful of the questions.
Yeah. First, I'll just be foreshadowing a declaration of impartiality next week as I work within the office of the member for Lansdale, who has been liaising with the city in terms of this project. Deputy Mayor, all of my questions relate to information on the public record in this agenda.
Thank you, Councillor Rowe.
The first question was about the actual community consultation numbers on page 214. Of the 1,205 local residents who received a letter, the percentage of people who actually responded was 0.2% with feedback. I was just wondering, from administration's point of view, is this considerably lower or on par with some of the Your Say consultation campaigns that occur?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, look, can I just clarify? I have received some feedback on the community consultation and from our community facilities team. They did mention that the letter which been referred to in this report was sent out in May 2021. It was a supplementary letter. There was one which had already occurred prior to that one with all the relevant stakeholders and user groups of the facility during the design phase of the project. So which demonstrated the support of the project. Yes, I'll clarify that in the report for next week. We'll add a bit more information. The two responses definitely don't indicate there's not enough response, but the reason for that was there was previous consultation on this particular project.
And the second question was just at the beginning of the overall comment, it refers to the fact that the two tenderers who scored highest on the overall weighted assessment were either disqualified or they removed themselves from the tendering process because the bid validity time expired. Did administration have any comment on that? Were they concerned at all that that had occurred, or was that a natural process that they just weren't prepared to delay that?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, without going into the details which are in confidential attachment, which council members may refer to, there is a table in that one, you may refer to that, probably answers your question. From administration point of view, the tenders who didn't extend the validity would not have impacted the recommendation. The recommendation would have still be the same.
Thank you, Mr. Singh. Further questions, Councillor Herridge?
Just one, just to clarify. I know this has actually been a little bit of time since the grant actually come through, so it's come from like 2017, I believe. Just to clarify, there's obviously a few hold-ups for it to actually come to council now for approval.
Through you, Deputy Mayor, when the tenders closed, as our report outlines, there was a shortfall in funding. So administration point of view, we were trying to see if state government will provide more funding through the department or through a local member. We approached that. Given that we didn't get the indication that's likely to be possible, so we then looked at what internally we can find savings or unspent funds from other projects which can be redirected to this particular one to deliver this project. That's why there's a gap in that period, and the recommendation outlines where the funding will be coming from.
Mr. CEO.
Just supplementary, Mr Deputy Mayor, and what Mr Singh just explained represents the principle that we've applied across all the state-funded election promises. Council's strong preference has always been to, first of all, try to contain capital expenditure within the grant. On this one, through various opportunities, we weren't able to do so. So the delay was as a result of trying to seek additional funding.
Further questions on this one, councillors? There's nil. 4.12. Questions? There is nil.
Sorry, Deputy Mayor, can I just make a quick comment on that particular item?
Certainly.
The recommendation, I'll be adding a couple of more words in the recommendation. It does not mention there are 2 extensions also possible should the tender be awarded next week. So I'll be clarifying that in the tender report.
Thank you, Mr Singh. And that concludes, or no? Yes, it does. It concludes assets. And I know that the Acting Director of Community is dying to get up to the table. Welcome, Mr Marmion.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I'm actually not proposing to introduce the remaining 2 items because I think one of them's been to Forum and the other one to the Audit and Risk Committee, so I'm happy to take questions on both of those items.
And welcome as well, Mrs Russell. Councillors, we've done 4.13. Are there any questions on 4.14? There is nil. Okay. 4.15. Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy. My question is just in relation to the high heritage risk classification. Given that we've classified heritage risk as high, can administration ensure that our Indigenous community are represented in the East Wanneroo Community Reference Group or other similar bodies that look at the impact of land development, particularly when it's extensive, across culturally significant sites?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, thank you for the question. The short answer to that is yes. It's part of the preventative controls that we've got for this particular risk. Yeah, there's no problem with that. And I guess the proposal is also to take the risk from high to moderate as well. So.
And the second part of the question, given that we're in the context of going through our 4th Reconciliation Action Plan, does our RAP formally recognise heritage risks and our mitigation or management strategies that we employ around those risks?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, thank you for the question. It's probably the other way around. The RAP actually is a preventative control for the risk rather than the RAP needing to have the risk outline in detail. So there's a number of preventative controls and a number of mitigation controls for this particular risk, and that's why the proposal is to take the risk from high to moderate.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. Any further questions on that, on 4.15, councillors? There is nil. Thank you both very much. Oh no, we should make... Nolan, you absolutely need to get up and hobble. No, you don't. Yeah. Just for those listening, the director unfortunately has had a small incident with a foot. So, Mr. Jennings, welcome. And Mr. Greer.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor, and good evening, everyone. We have 4 reports here in this section. They're all, I think they've either been discussed or they're monthly reports. And I think there's a working group on the last one. So yeah, I'm happy to take questions, please.
Right, thank you, councillors. From the top, 4.16, Councillor Miles.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just wanted to ask, administration, on page 270, there's some obviously variances, unfavourable variances due to booking fees of some of our, I guess, buildings, rental and stuff. While some of that may have been down to COVID, I understand from quite a few business companies around the place, they're noticing a downturn also in some of their, I guess, sales of their products. Is this something that we've looked at in our budget, our draft budget, bearing in mind we're sort of heading into a very, very high cost of living period coming up over the next 12 months?
Ms Jennings.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We always try and do zero-based budgeting. With revenue, we do have to take into account what's been happening. Certainly, a month of April has improved on the previous 3 months, so they were definitely lower. I suspect was related to COVID in a lot of ways. So we'll certainly be watching how they go, because you can see at the start of the financial year it was also higher. So there's a bit of variation there for certain, but we also know what our new rubbish fee collection should be and what our rental fees. So there are some ones that have got definite data that we can calculate through. It might just be some of those that are more optional, like the booking fees, but the significance of those, we'll take that into account as well. Thank you.
Just to further on that same page, I just wanted to understand what the application licence fee income, or what is the application licence fee? Is that a planning fee?
Deputy Mayor, I'll have to take that one on notice, just double check. I don't want to say it's the applications when it might be a different application fee. So,
Thank you, Mrs Jennings.
And just, I guess finally on page 273, the employee costs, and I know we've been talking about this earlier today, obviously with the actuals, and obviously we're now sort of starting to fill some of those vacancies that were allowed to drop out last year because of COVID. Have we still got a number of vacancy roles still to be filled, or are we pretty much at the capacity required?
Mrs Jennings.
thank you, Deputy Mayor. With an organisation this size, there are always some vacancies because we're filling them as we go. So, and some vacancies will take a lot longer to fill than others. So, a senior role might take 3 months or so because you wait for someone to also give notice at their current position. So, there are a number of vacancies that we do carry. In general, though, our ones that were had to be left vacant for a while to save some funds during the previous financial year, we have caught up on. So I don't know if anyone else, if the CEO wanted to add at all.
Mr CEO.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. At this point in time, and I adopt this practice most financial years, when we're coming towards the end of the financial year and until Council adopts a new budget, I do review vacancies as they occur, which are linked to future programs that have yet had their funding confirmed in the budget. So at the moment, all vacant positions as they arise are reviewed by myself.
Yeah, look, thank you. My last question is on page 275, and it's in regarding to utility charges. Now, it's obviously a favourable variance of $190,000 in lower expenses for electricity. Now, is that because the council has invested in using solar in some of our areas? Because we know that last year the state government ramped up electricity charges for our street lighting and stuff like that. So I'm just trying to wonder why we actually had a good variance. Was that through some work that we'd done, or does that correlate to the fact that we haven't been renting out some of our areas, which was I highlighted earlier?
Heminder.
Through Deputy Mayor, it is more to do with the billing cycle as well. As we receive the bills and they get paid, not necessarily the way the budget is done, that's done based on the what assets are coming to us, especially street lighting every month. A lot of other assets are quite static, but it could be the billing cycle that's causing the variance.
And I'm sure we're all waiting with bated breath to see what sort of an increase we get from the streetlight tariff.
I would get to some extent that that could be part of it, but if you actually look at the chart on that page, the actuals have been sort of trending down a little bit, and the budgeted item is obviously quite high, the bar chart that we have there. So that's why I asked the question, because it doesn't look like it's a billing cycle issue. It looks like we're either not using as much electricity because we're doing something else, and that's what I was trying to understand, because $190,000 saving is quite substantial.
I'll just point out that that wasn't a question, that was an observation. But Mr. Singh?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The second part of, look, we can investigate further if that's required, but the second part could be, we do get streetlights handed over to us from the developers, and they go onto Western Power's database quite regularly, and then we do estimate what's likely to come, and that kind of shows in the budget what's coming ahead to us in the next 12 months, month-to-month basis. If that doesn't happen, obviously we're going to pay less to Western Power.
Okay, councillors, further questions on 4.16? 4.17 with the usual disclaimer. 4.18. 4.17.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, just a very quick question. On page 334, item number 4529, we've got Wanneroo Business Association Incorporated, and you've got webinar delivery, how to win more work in a competitive market. Can you actually confirm that that sum was actually the speaker's hire fee and it wasn't the cost of the webinar?
I think we'll take that on notice. Okay, well.
I can confirm that would have been the fee to the speaker, yes.
Okay. And just again, councillors, if we have anything, and I'll labour this point every time we get to this item, if we can go through this and place those in writing to the director beforehand, we can have our questions answered as accurately as possible on the evening. Thank you. 4.18, which is the Smart Cities Strategy. Councillor Rowe.
Thanks, Deputy Mayor. I know that community safety and deterring crime are key focuses of the Smart Cities Strategy, particularly with the increased presence of CCTV technology. I was hoping the strategy could also, over time, include technology that helps monitor and measure the usage of community facilities, particularly at our parks, so our playgrounds and areas like that, because I think this would ensure that the park upgrades could occur as required and on a as-needs basis, rather than having to have always an over-reliance on the active reserve master planning process. So that's just a question to the Director.
Mrs Jennings.
Thank you, through Deputy Mayor. Certainly, collection of data is fundamental to this smart city strategy, so that we're able to really act upon anything that's best for our community and that is aligned to our strategic community plan. And asset utilisation is a very important one too, because it helps us be more efficient. So not only are we upgrading the right assets at the right time, but we're making sure they're being well utilised. So that would come under the community aspect of aligned to the strategic community plan. So definitely one that we'd be interested in, and we would hope developers would be too. And certainly we've done some work with developers on playgrounds already and hopefully more so in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe, we should have a chat about who actually came up with the idea about the active reserves master planning process. Thank you. It's a discussion for later. Any further questions on this item, councillors? There is none. 4.19, and again, councillors, if there is any questions on some aspects of this, it is in the confidential attachments. Are there any questions? Councillor Miles, just again with that disclaimer
Thank you,
about
Deputy
the
Mayor.
confidential attachments.
The question I have, this is the BMX lease.
Yes, but you have an attachment in the confidential
I'm not reading
section.
from the attachment, Deputy Mayor. I'm reading from the briefing session agenda.
No, Councillor Miles, again, just so as we're all aware, there is information in the attachments which is confidential.
I have
Provided
no
of-
attachments in front of me, Deputy Mayor.
Well, provided of Councillor Miles, provided it doesn't refer to any of the information in the confidential data that is attached to this item, that's fine to ask the question.
My question, obviously, Mr. Greer, you're taking the questions on this. With the lease, with the track lease, and I know that we have somewhat been working on trying to get the 5 and the 5 years. I'm just a bit concerned that we're not actually optioning up to 5 years at the initial. We're actually only going to give them like about 18 months before the new sort of lease starts. What's the theory of that?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. The proposal, when it was put to the club, and the club has indicated its acceptance to it, was that the lease had a period to run until 2024. We would surrender that old lease, give them a term that was the same as that, but give them the ability then to exercise options as one, they were able to secure funding and approvals for the works that they plan. Their request for a longer term lease was tied directly to that. So we said, look, if you can actually achieve those things, you'll have your option. And then a further option term tied to actually undertaking those works. So I guess incentivising that as they delivered the things that they were asking to have a longer lease to secure, then they have the longer term.
So effectively, we're actually giving them, as it states, 2 options, but they don't. But the first option to renew doesn't start until sometime in 24, and then there's another option 5 years later, back in 2034. In 2034, so we got 5 years, commencing on the 11th of June of 24, and expiring on June of 29. And then another 5 years possibly, which takes them up to 2034. What would be the, because this club's been super patient with council in whether it gets relocated or not, and it has now received some funding from the federal member of Pearce coming up. What do they need to achieve then to I guess, roll this lease straight over? I know there were some issues with the sewerage, and administration's going to try and sort that out because the site does need deep sewerage. I also know the other big issue that they have is whether there's enough power going to that site. So is administration going to finalise that before 2024?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. The first part of the question relating to, I guess, what they need to do to exercise that first 5 year option. 2 of the aspects of the main aspect of the option is the standard one, that they're not in default under the lease, and they haven't been in the past. So one would expect that would continue. The second part is really around them having secured approvals for their works. So if they're at the stage where they've secured the funding and they've got a DA to do their works, they're basically ready to trigger the option right then and there. So it's in their hands. They will have a lease that they will be able to demonstrate to potential funders if they're seeking funding that they've got the tenure, and the longer tenure is tied to them having those approvals. On the question regarding the electrical works, there is some information in the briefing report regarding that. So essentially, the club expressed some concerns regarding the switchboard servicing the site. Administration has investigated that. Unfortunately, it is complicated because it involves Western Power as well, and the advice from our contractor, from Wanneroo Electrics, is that the board is still functional. It has sort of up to, 3 to 5 years of useful life. There is potential of issues in the meantime, as with any bit of infrastructure, but what they've recommended is we firstly liaise with Western Power to confirm that an upgrade can occur and that there's no need to increase the power supply into the site, which is a potential, and there'd be costs arising from that. And then secondly, to, proceed with those works. So we are working on that. It's likely a consultant to do the liaising with Western Power would be on board early in the coming financial year, so not very far away.
Okay, because obviously the funding that's coming forward from the new federal government, part of that I understand is obviously to upgrade the lighting as well, which will more than likely be LED lighting. So I am concerned that the current box that's been there forever is obviously not going to be able to possibly take that load. We quite often get told many times by the Director of Community in Place that these sort of things need to be upgraded on our normal sites. So I am concerned that maybe we're not going to be preemptive there and at least get the box upgraded to a certain point where they can obviously then, if they need to expand it with more amperage, then maybe we can sort of suggest that's more of their cost, not the city cost.
Your question, councillor?
Well, it was towards the end of that, Deputy Mayor.
No, there was no question there, councillor. If you could just rephrase that into a question, please.
So bearing in mind that, so I'll go over the item again. Bearing in mind that the club has got a $1 million commitment from our new federal member, they're going to be doing some upgrades to that site. Part of that upgrade is going to be electrical, kitchen as well as lighting. Does the current box take the amperage required to be able to do those upgrades, or are we going to make the club pay for those upgrades themselves?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, we would have to understand that through, one, the club confirming what it now proposes to do. A lot of the discussions with the club around its scope of works were, more than, say, 6 to 8 weeks ago, and predated some of the funding they've received. But secondly, that would go hand in hand with the investigations with Western Power. So understanding, is it simply replacing a box with a box that has high capacity but using the existing level of power that's available for the site, or does the whole lot have to be upgraded? And I would expect, without preempting it too much, the scale of those costs is going to determine whether, one, it's something that a club can contribute to, and two, is it similar to what the city would have already scheduled, or is it much more? What we noted with this as administration with the report is some of these investigations do need more time, and we didn't want to lose sight of the fact that a longer term tenure for the club was very beneficial for its funding. So we could have said it's going to take another year to do these investigations. They've got another 2 years to go on their lease. Let's just put it on hold while we work it out. That would be detrimental to the club, and so we felt it was appropriate to still present this longer term lease even with the investigations ongoing in the background.
And I guess just to say, with the funding possibly coming through, is that funding going direct to the club, or do you know if it's coming via the city?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I need to take that on notice. I don't have that information at hand.
Councillor Civic.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Considering this is a strategic site for the city, I'll say that I'm comfortable with the BMX remaining there, but the fact is that they will be there till 2034 if this is approved. How serious will BMX be looking at relocating, because this will then now give them a cushion to remain on the site? And the other question with regards to the the amount of funding that's coming from the federal government, which will, I guess, be spent, as I understood, on the track. Would that money be better spent on a new premises? Because as we get to the end of this extended lease, if it is approved, how serious will we be looking at, or they will be looking at getting another site? And there again, they will be looking for more funding to actually develop that site at the time. Thank you.
Mr Greer.
Through you, Deputy Mayor. As noted in the report, the investigations on an alternative site are still ongoing, and a council working group is in place assisting with that. I'd expect that would continue, and then it would be a matter of, if a suitable alternative site was identified, working with the club to confirm that is suitable and look at the options. What I guess we are at this point in time, we're not at a point where we're ready to have a final relocation. So again, holding up some improvements the club could benefit from in the interim, it didn't seem a good outcome. So provide some further tenure, but still continue with the investigations in the meantime.
Councillor Raitkin.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. As far as electrical upgrades are concerned, at the moment the switchboard is working appropriately from what you say with the structure the way it is. Normally when you upgrade a building, would you agree that the electrical upgrade and the new switchboard is done within the context of that build and doesn't need to be considered or worried about other than the Western Power supply to it, which is negotiated with the upgrading of the build through the electrical contractor at that time? Would you agree?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, I would agree in respect of an upgrade would trigger the need to look at whether the power supply needs to be upgraded. I guess the issue is the infrastructure is nearing the end of its life. It's not quite there, but it's nearly there. So it's a case of, if it takes the club a bit longer to get all of the funding it needs and to, say, for instance, be ready to put the lighting in, it would just be prudent for us to look at that in parallel.
Okay. Further question, is there consideration of the flooding of the street drainage into the site as well? Is there negotiating with that to be able to fix that up as well?
Through you, Deputy Mayor. I may just have to take the overall part of the question on notice. I know that the city has works to connect it to the sewer, but that is not overall drainage. It's the sewer connection to the site.
It often overflows onto the site and creates problems, and that street drainage needs to be looked at.
Yeah, noted on.
Thank you.
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Nguyen.
Just in relation to the make good provisions on page 4 to 8, in particular where the club surrenders the lease early, is there a cost to the city to make good the site? Or is there a need to do that?
Yeah, through you. Yep. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. The question would probably come down to what the future use of the site was going to be. Most likely it wouldn't be used as a BMX facility. It would be redeveloped in one form or another. And the cost to the city, we're hypothetical, but would be really looking at whether, for instance, if we were selling it for development, whether a developer was taking it as is, or if we were redeveloping it ourselves, yes, we would absorb that into our development costs. It depends on the circumstances, but if we were relocating the club, that would be with the club's cooperation, and our view was it was not appropriate to make them clean and clear the site and make it good the same way they would at the ordinary end of the term.
But they are required to make good the site at the end of the term, isn't it?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, correct. At the expiry of the lease, yes.
Yes, and is it to restore it to its original, I don't know, character, and what would that look like? Is it before the upgrade or from the original sort of site before they took over?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, it would be a matter of removing improvements and leaving it clean and clear. So it wouldn't be a case of rehabilitating vegetation or anything of that sort. It would be buildings, infrastructure, those sort of things being removed, which would be fairly typical for a ground lease site. Some of the ones that have been to council more recently would be a similar scenario.
Any further questions, councillors? There is nil. Thank you, Mr Jennings. Thank you, Mr Greer. Mr CEO, Office of the Chief Executive Officer reports.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. There are 3 items under the Office of the CEO presented at this evening's briefing session. 4.20, Risk Appetite Statement and Risk Assessment Criteria, has been reviewed and driven by Council through workshops. 4.21, Strategic Risk Register Update, is a recommendation flowing through from Audit and Risk. And 4.22 is the Annual Delegated Authority Review for the period 2021 to 2022. Mr Deputy Mayor, I'm happy to take questions on all 3 items.
Councillors, will take those from the top. Item 4.20. There is nil. Item 4.21. There is nil. And item 4.22. There is nil. Thank you, Mr CEO. That moves us on to item 5, motions on notice. We have motions on notice listed at 5.1, 5.2 and 5.3. That will be considered next week. And 5.4 has been withdrawn. Item 6 is late reports. At this stage, there is nil. Item 7, public question time. There appears to be nil. And there was a question submitted by the, that has been responded to in writing. We move on to item 8, which is confidential session. So, councillors, we will be going behind closed doors for item 8. So, formally just acknowledge that. Thank you, councillors. With that, we move on to item 9. Date of next meeting. The ordinary council meeting will be held on Tuesday, the 14th of June, 2022 at 6 p.m. in the council chambers at Wanneroo. Item 11 is closure. The meeting is declared closed at 8:15 p.m. Thank you all.